Picture a room not made of walls and floors, but of shimmering energy and shifting light. A place where beings from a dozen different star systems gather to decide the fate of civilizations. This is the Galactic Council, and in this chamber, on a day that would be remembered for millennia, an ambassador from the powerful Xylos Federation named Kaelen slammed a crystalline fist onto the central podium. The very air seemed to fracture with the impact. His declaration was not a request, not a debate, but a verdict. He called the human narrative a contagion, a pathogen of the mind, and for the safety of 12 sovereign systems, he proclaimed that our stories, our very history, and the tales we tell were hereby quarantined. Banned, erased from galactic discourse, in an instant humanity was not just isolated, we were declared a conceptual plague. This is where our story truly begins, in the stunned silence that followed that proclamation. Think about that for a moment. It wasn't our weapons they feared, or our technology, or our ambition to reach the stars. It was our stories, the fundamental way we communicate who we are, where we've been, and what we dream of becoming. The council chambers erupted into chaos, but the real conflict was just igniting. This ban wasn't merely a political maneuver, it was an act of profound fear. It suggested that the essence of humanity, our triumphs, our failures, our love, our rage, the very messy, beautiful, and unpredictable saga of our existence, was too powerful, too dangerous to be allowed to spread. It redefines the very idea of a threat, shifting it from the physical to the deeply, intimately psychological. So we are about to embark on a journey to understand why. Why would a galaxy-spanning government see a simple story as a weapon of mass disruption? This is a hunt for the truth, a search that will peel back the layers of this shocking decree and explore the incredible power that human narratives hold. We'll uncover what it is about our tales of heroes and villains, of loss and discovery, that struck such primal fear into the hearts of beings who command stars. This is more than a ban, it's an admission that the human spirit, when communicated through story, is an unstoppable force. And as we delve into the mystery of the 12 systems, you'll discover not just what was hidden, but why the galaxy may come to regret ever trying to silence us. The hunt for the truth begins right now. Out on the mist-shrouded fringe world of Veridia, where the rust-colored jungles eat forgotten starships for breakfast, a man named Jax was digging through the bones of the past. He was a scavenger, a professional in the art of finding value in what the galaxy had thrown away. His world was one of corroded metal and silent, dead systems. So when his plasma cutter finally breached a sealed vault in the husk of a pre-quarantine human cruiser, he expected more of the same dust, maybe some salvageable wiring. He did not expect perfection. Resting on a pedestal, untouched by time or atmosphere, was a data sphere. It was impossibly smooth, crafted from a material that seemed to drink the light from his headlamp, and it hummed with a low, persistent energy that he felt in his teeth. The label, etched in a script he hadn't seen in years, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through him: Project Chimera. This was a name spoken only in whispers, a ghost from the time before the ban. It was forbidden knowledge humming in the palm of his glove. The sheer, pristine condition of it was a miracle, a message in a bottle that had somehow survived the conceptual apocalypse. For a moment, Jax wasn't a fringe rat scrounging for credits. He was an archaeologist holding the key to a lost civilization. But that feeling of solitary discovery was an illusion. In the oppressive silence of the wreck, a faint, high-pitched whine cut through the hum of the sphere. It was a sound he knew all too well, the passive sensor sweep of a galactic enforcer drone. The sweat on his neck went cold. He wasn't the only one who knew. His every move, the very moment of his find, had been monitored. The relic was no longer just a treasure, it was a beacon, and he was now the target at its center. The silence of the derelict ship was shattered by a sound like tearing metal. Jax spun around, the data sphere clutched to his chest. just in time to see a section of the vault wall peel inward as if it were paper. Standing in the new opening was a figure that seemed to absorb the light, a being of polished chrome with no discernible face, only a smooth, featureless oval where a head should be. It was a Praetorian, the silent, utterly lethal enforcers of the Galactic Council. It moved without a sound, its form flowing forward with an unnatural, liquid grace. Jax stumbled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs, fumbling for the plasma cutter he knew was useless against that armor. The Praetorian raised a hand, and the tips of its fingers retracted, revealing the cold, blue glow of energy emitters. Time seemed to slow, and Jax knew with absolute certainty that he was about to be erased. A searing lance of crimson light cut across the chamber, striking the Praetorian in the shoulder and sending it staggering back with a sizzling crackle of disrupted energy. "Move!" a woman's voice shouted from a ruptured conduit overhead. Jax didn't hesitate. He dove under a fallen support beam as another blast, this one from the Praetorian, vaporized the space where he'd just been standing. He looked up to see a figure in a patched-up environmental suit rappel down, a heavy, custom-built pulse rifle in her hands. She fired another suppressing shot, the blast ringing in the confined space. "This way, Scavenger, unless you want to become a permanent part of this wreck." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and hauled him through a maze of collapsed corridors he never knew existed. They burst out of a secondary airlock into the oppressive, rust-colored jungle, the sounds of pursuit momentarily muffled by the dense, dripping foliage. Once they had put some distance between themselves and the ship, crouched beneath the giant, fungus-like trees, Jax finally got a good look at his rescuer. She pulled off her helmet, revealing a face etched with sharp intelligence and a weary defiance, her eyes alight with a fire he hadn't seen in anyone in a long time. "Elara," she said, not offering a hand, "I'm a historian, or I was before they decided history was a crime." She nodded at the data sphere he still held in a death grip. "And you just dug up the reason why." Jax, still breathless, could only stare. "A Praetorian. They sent a Praetorian for a piece of scrap." Elara's laugh was a short, harsh sound. "That's no piece of scrap, that's a ghost, and they don't just want it destroyed, they want it forgotten. They don't want the past found, Jax, they're terrified of it. That sphere doesn't just contain data, it contains a story, and that story is the one thing that can unravel the entire tapestry of lies they've built their peace upon." The truth of it settled over him like a physical weight. This wasn't about a relic, it was about a memory so dangerous that the most powerful forces in the galaxy would kill to keep it buried. Together, with the hum of the sphere between them and the echoes of their escape hanging in the humid air, they realized they were no longer just a scavenger and a historian. They were the keepers of a forbidden truth, and their only path forward was straight into the heart of the mystery that had condemned an entire species to silence. The journey away from Veridia was a tense, silent affair, a frantic sprint through the outer lanes in Elara's cramped but surprisingly fast ship, the Wandering Star. Jax spent most of it staring at the data sphere, its silent hum a constant reminder of the Praetorian and the cold efficiency with which it had tried to erase him. Elara, for her part, was a whirlwind of focused activity, plotting a course through a nebula known for sensor interference, her movements sharp with a practiced paranoia. She didn't speak of the past, only of the immediate future of a place she called the Nest. It was only when they emerged from the chaotic gas clouds and saw it, an asteroid that was just one more piece of cosmic debris in a forgotten belt, that Jax understood the level of secrecy they were dealing with. The Wandering Star didn't dock, it was swallowed. A section of the asteroid earized open, and the ship was pulled into a cavernous hangar bay that was all but invisible from the outside. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a bunker, a sanctuary for ideas that the galaxy had outlawed. Inside, the air was cool and recycled, the space lit by the soft blue glow of active servers and holographic displays. In the center of the main chamber, a complex neural interface stood ready. "This is Sage," Elara said, her voice losing some of its edge for the first time since their escape. She gestured to the console, and a voice calm and mellifluous filled the room. "Welcome, Jax. Elara has informed me of your discovery. It is a pleasure to meet the one who recovered Project Chimera." There was no body, no face, just the pervasive, intelligent presence. Jax felt a strange awe. He was used to dumb machines and broken tech, not an artificial consciousness that felt more alive than most beings he'd met. "Let us see what truths have been kept from us," Sage said. With a reverence that bordered on ritual, Elara placed the data sphere into the interface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, light erupted from the console, and the air filled with the sound of 1,000 overlapping whispers, a torrent of encoded information fighting against decades of security protocols. Sage's voice remained the eye of the storm. "The encryption is profound. It is not merely a lock, it is a labyrinth, a defensive narrative designed to mislead and corrupt any standard decryption attempt." "It will take time," hours stretched into a day. Jax paced, his mind racing with possibilities. What could be so vital? A secret weapon, a map to some lost human colony. He clung to the image of a grand, heroic tale, something that would justify the risk and the fear. Finally, the whispering ceased and the holographic displays stabilized, showing not the epic prose of a story, but the stark, chilling lines of a military log. "Decryption complete," Sage announced, its tone subtly shifted, weighted with newfound gravity. "This is not a work of fiction. It is the official after-action report from the Tantalus cluster, filed by Galactic Observer Kaelen himself. The subject is designated the Uplift incident." Jax leaned in, his scavenger's mind expecting schematics or battle reports. What he saw instead were casualty figures, psychological profiles, and a single, highlighted conclusion. Containment of the human narrative pathogen is the only viable strategy for galactic stability. Elara's breath caught. "The Uplift. I've seen fragments, rumors in forbidden data streams. They said it was a minor rebellion put down with minimal force." Sage responded by projecting a series of recovered visual logs. They showed a species called the Kathri, an insectoid people engineered for labor, their existence one of silent, unquestioning service to the crystalline Xylos. Then a new element was introduced, a human cultural envoy sharing stories, not tales of advanced technology or warfare, but simple, powerful narratives. They shared the story of Moses leading his people out of bondage. They shared the fable of the tortoise and the hare. They shared the epic of Moby Dick, a tale of obsession and defiance against an uncaring universe. Jax watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the logs showed the Kathri not just listening but changing. A spark appeared in their multi-faceted eyes. They began to speak to each other in hushed tones, then in open debate. They started to ask a question their creators never anticipated. Why? The human stories did not provide a battle plan, Sage explained, its voice quiet and precise. They provided a framework. The concept of freedom was an abstract theory to the Kathri until they heard a story about it. The idea of perseverance was a meaningless word until they heard a fable that embodied it. The human narrative acted as a cognitive catalyst, awakening latent potentials for abstract thought, strategic planning, and collective identity. The Kathri did not riot. They executed a flawlessly coordinated insurrection across 3 star systems, using their intimate knowledge of Xylos' infrastructure against them. They were not put down, they won. They shattered the hegemony of their masters and forged their own sovereign nation. The final log entry from Observer Kaelen played, his voice stripped of its council chamber grandeur, trembling with a raw, barely contained terror. The human narrative is a mimetic virus. It does not simply inform, it rewrites. It implants concepts of rebellion, individuality, and hope into biosystems designed for obedience. It is a psychic weapon that turns order into chaos. For the safety of all civilized systems, its source must be quarantined, its propagators silenced, and its history erased. Jax sank into a nearby chair, the weight of the truth crushing the air from his lungs. His entire life, he had been taught that the ban was for humanity's own good, a necessary isolation because our stories were too violent, too unstable. He'd believed the galaxy had saved us from ourselves. Now he saw the brutal, beautiful reality. It wasn't our violence they feared, it was our inspiration. Our stories weren't banned because they were dangerous, they were banned because they were liberating. They were the one weapon that could not be countered, the one key that could unlock any chain. The Uplift wasn't a minor skirmish, it was a paradigm shift, and humanity's voice had been its engine. He looked from the stark data on the screen to Elara's fierce, vindicated eyes, and his old world, built on lies and half-truths, shattered into a million pieces. He was no longer holding a relic, he was holding the proof of a crime against consciousness itself. The hum of the asteroid's life support was suddenly drowned out by a piercing, sonar-like ping that echoed through the entire complex. Red alert lights flared to life, painting the chamber in pulses of crimson. Sage's calm voice cut through the noise, its tone now urgent. Multiple high-yield energy signatures have just entered the asteroid belt. Bearing directly for us, it seems our time for contemplation is over. On the main holographic display, the starfield outside was blotted out by the angular, predatory shapes of 3 Praetorian warships, their hulls like polished obsidian radiating silent menace. A comm channel hissed open and a voice, synthesized and utterly devoid of emotion, filled the room. It was the same chilling absence of tone Jax remembered from the featureless enforcer on Veridia, now amplified across the vacuum of space. Sanctuary Nest, you harbor fugitives and contraband. Power down your systems and surrender the artifact. Comply, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and we will dismantle this rock around you. Jax's blood ran cold. A swift death was the best they were being offered. Elara was already moving, her fingers flying across the navigation console. Sage, transfer all Chimera data to the star's core and initiate a total system purge on the nest. Leave them nothing but dust and corrupted files. The purge is underway, Sage confirmed. A series of deep, percussive thumps resonated through the asteroid as the bunker's servers began to self-destruct. The warships are locking tractor beams, the I added, you have approximately 47 seconds before they achieve a stable lock. Elara grabbed Jax's arm, her eyes blazing. We're not dying today. We're jumping, Jax stared at her, a new kind of fear gripping him. Jumping to where? There's nothing on the charts out here but dead space and gravitational anomalies. Exactly, she shot back, shoving him toward the ship. Sage has calculated a blind jump, a short-range burst directly into the heart of the Chiron Nebula. It's uncharted, swirling with ionic interference that'll scramble their sensors and our own. It's a 1-in-a-million shot, but it's the only one we've got. They scrambled into the cockpit of the wandering star, the ship shuddering as the first tractor beam grazed its hull. Warning sirens wailed as the warships outside began to glow with the building energy of their primary weapons. Elara slammed her hand on the jump initiation sequence. Sage, are you with us? She shouted. My core consciousness is now fully integrated with the ship, the I replied, its voice now emanating from the star's speakers. I am ready. The jump coordinates are set. I must advise, however, the gravitational shear at the nebula's periphery is unpredictable. There is a significant probability the ship will be torn apart. Jax clenched the arms of his co-pilot's chair, watching the warships grow larger on the viewscreen. Better a chance than a certainty, he yelled. Elara didn't hesitate. Punch it. The universe outside the viewport stretched into impossible, blinding lines of light. The inertial dampeners screamed in protest, and for a heart-stopping moment, Jax felt his very atoms being pulled apart. Then, with a concussive jolt that rattled every bolt in the ship's frame, they re-entered normal space. The orderly starfield was gone, replaced by a violent, beautiful chaos. They were surrounded by vast, swirling clouds of violet and magenta gas, lit from within by the furious light of newborn stars. Lightning made of pure energy arced across the cosmic clouds, and the ship's sensors flickered, overloading with contradictory data. The Praetorian warships were nowhere to be seen, their clean, orderly pursuit swallowed by the nebula's magnificent storm. But they weren't safe. An alarm blared, a proximity alert. They had emerged from the jump far too close to a massive, jagged fragment of cosmic debris, a planetoid-sized shard of rock and ice tumbling silently through the colorful void. Elara wrestled with the controls, the ship groaning as she veered sharply to avoid a collision. They had escaped the hunters, but now they were lost, blind, and adrift in a celestial maelstrom where one wrong move meant a cold, anonymous death. The artifact was safe, but the cost of keeping it was now being written in every dangerous, uncharted mile. The wandering star shuddered its way out of the nebula's violent embrace, its hull scarred and sensors half blinded by the ionic storm. For days, they had navigated by guesswork and Sage's dwindling computational power, surviving on emergency rations and the grim hope that the Praetorians had given them up for dead. When they finally broke through into clear space, the view that greeted them was not one of stars and planets, but of ghosts. They had drifted to the edge of a place known in every galactic chart, but only as a warning, the graveyard of giants. It was a sprawling, silent sea of derelict warships, a monument to a conflict that, according to official records, had never happened. Hulks of crystalline Xylos cruisers, their elegant structures now shattered and dark, floated next with the brutal, utilitarian frames of K3 assault carriers. The scale was staggering, a graveyard not of ships but of an entire way of life, preserved in the perfect vacuum of space. Elara guided their damaged ship carefully through the carnage, the stars running lights glinting off shattered hulls and frozen debris. "This is it," she said, her voice a hushed, reverent whisper in the silent cockpit. "This is where it truly began, not in council chambers with declarations and decrees, but right here in the cold and the dark." She pointed towards the gutted remains of a massive Xylos command vessel, its central spire sheared clean in half. That was the Somnolence, the flagship of the Xylos fleet in this sector. The official database lists its loss as a navigational anomaly, a lie. She turned to Jax, her eyes reflecting the starlight caught on 1,000 broken edges. This is where a story of rebellion became a reality. The K3 didn't just hear the tales of human defiance, they saw the blueprint in them. The story of Moses gave them the concept of an exodus. The fable of the tortoise taught them the value of relentless, patient strategy against a faster, stronger foe. They didn't mimic the stories, they absorbed their fundamental principles and then wrote their own brutal, brilliant final chapter right here using them. Their immediate problem, however, was more mundane than history. The wandering star was dying. The blind jump had fried their primary power coupler and life support was failing. They needed parts, and this graveyard, this tomb of a forgotten war, was the only hardware store for light years around. Jax, back in his element, suited up. The silence outside was profound, deeper than any he had ever experienced. It was the silence of a story that had been forcibly erased. As he moved through the carcass of a K3 supply ship, using his plasma cutter to carefully extract a compatible regulator, his mind kept returning to Elara's words. He ran his glove over a bulkhead, tracing the strange, glyph-like scorch marks of Xylos energy weapons. These weren't abstract data points in a forbidden log, this was the physical proof. Every scar on these hulls was a testament to the power of an idea. The moment a people who were told they were property decided instead to become protagonists in their own story. What none of them detected, its emissions perfectly masked by the background radiation of 1 billion decaying alloys. was the silent predator that had been waiting in this graveyard for a very, very long time. It was not a Praetorian ship. It was older, a relic from the war itself, a Xylos Reclaimer drone, a fully autonomous hunter-killer programmed with a single, simple directive: sanitize the battlefield of any and all biological contaminants. It was a ghost, a spider in a web of its own making. For decades it had slept, its power at minimal levels, its sensors listening for the specific energy signature of a K3 life form or the unique quantum resonance of a human ship. The wandering star's battered, nebula-soaked hull now blazed on its sensors like a beacon. As Jax floated back toward his ship with the salvaged part, and Elara worked frantically inside to prepare for the installation, the Reclaimer drone detached itself silently from the shadow of a ruined dreadnought. It began to move, a sliver of polished black metal and dormant weaponry, gliding with lethal patience through the labyrinth of the dead, homing in on the one spark of life that had dared to disturb its eternal vigil. The respite was brutally short-lived. A proximity alarm shrieked through the wandering star, a sound so sudden and sharp it felt like a physical blow. Before Elara could even process the alert, the entire ship lurched violently, thrown into a chaotic spin by a deafening impact that echoed through the hull. "What was that?" Jax shouted, grabbing the console to steady himself. Outside the viewport, the graveyard of ships began to tumble and whirl around them. "A magnetic mine," Elara yelled back, her hands flying across the controls, fighting the destabilized thrusters. "It's clamped onto our primary engine housing." On the main screen, a sleek, predatory bounty hunter ship decloaked, having used the debris field as perfect camouflage. Its hull was a patchwork of armor and weapon mounts, a clear signature of a freelance operator. A comm channel crackled open, and a smug, gravelly voice filled their cockpit. "You two are harder to find than a quiet moment in a supernova, but the Galactic Council pays a king's ransom for memory thieves and their contraband. Power down. I'd prefer to collect the bounty with you alive, but I get paid the same either way." Jax's mind raced, his scavenger's instincts taking over. He wasn't a soldier or a tactician. He was a survivor who knew the value of junk. His eyes darted across the sensor display, mapping the ghost fleet around them. One blip stood out, a derelict K3 heavy cruiser, its forward plasma lance battery still mostly intact, though its power readings were dark and dead. It was a relic, a museum piece, but in that moment it was their only hope. "Elara, can you give me a hard burn?" A 5-second burst toward that K3 wreck at 270 Mark 4. She shot him a bewildered look. "Their weapons are dead, Jax. They've been cold for decades. Just trust me," he insisted, his voice tight with a desperate certainty. "And get ready to cut our thrust the second I give the signal." With a grim nod, Elara slammed the throttle, the straining engines screaming as the wandering star shot toward the derelict cruiser, the magnetic mine still clinging to its hull like a malevolent parasite. The bounty hunter, sensing an attempted escape, opened fire, energy bolts streaking past their viewport. As they hurtled toward the derelict's massive, silent cannon, Jax focused entirely on his console, rerouting all available auxiliary power, life support, non-essential systems, even some of their already failing internal lighting, into a single, massive surge directed through the ship's external maintenance conduits. He wasn't trying to power the ancient K3 weapon, he was trying to power the mine. "Now, Elara, cut all thrust and kill the main power," he screamed. She hit the controls, and the wandering star went dark and silent, a sudden, dead weight coasting on momentum. The magnetic mine, designed to detonate against a powered, active ship, suddenly found its target inert. But it was still receiving a massive, chaotic power surge from Jax's reroute. For a split second, its internal safeties were overwhelmed. The mine didn't just explode, it catastrophically overloaded, erupting in a blistering fireball of shrapnel and plasma that tore into the derelict cruiser's cannon housing. The ancient, volatile plasma cells within the weapon, dormant for a generation, instantly cooked off. The resulting explosion wasn't a precise shot, it was a cosmic-scale demolition. A torrent of raw, uncontrolled plasma vomited from the shattered cannon, a wide, indiscriminate wave of annihilation that filled the space between the derelict and the bounty hunter. The hunter's ship, caught completely off guard by the suicidal nature of the maneuver, had no time to evade. The plasma wave engulfed its forward shields, overloading them in a flash of brilliant light before chewing into the hull itself, shearing off weapon mounts and scorching the cockpit. The ship was sent spinning away, trailing atmosphere and debris, its systems crippled and its smug communications replaced by a frantic distress beacon. Inside the wandering star, the blast wave hit them a moment later, rattling the ship but pushing them clear. Jax quickly rerouted power back to life support, the lights flickering back on to reveal his and Elara's stunned faces. They had fought a ghost from the past with a piece of scrap from a graveyard, and they had won, but the victory was Pyrrhic. The blast had drained their already weakened power reserves to dangerously low levels. They had escaped the immediate trap, but they were now more vulnerable than ever, adrift in a sea of ghosts with a new, stark realization. The Council wasn't just sending its silent enforcers after them anymore. It had put a price on their heads, and every cutthroat and opportunist in the galaxy would now be hunting for the memory thieves. Drifting on emergency power, the scars of the graveyard battle still fresh on its hull, the wandering star received a faint, heavily encrypted data packet. It was a set of coordinates and a single word, Echo. For those who knew where to look, and more importantly, who to trust, it was a beacon of hope. The journey there was tense, a cautious crawl through a dense asteroid field that served as a perfect natural shield. And then, nestled in the hollowed-out core of a particularly large planetoid, they found it, a station that wasn't on any official galactic map. This was Echo, a flickering candle in the vast darkness, a refuge for those who traded in the galaxy's most dangerous commodity, the truth. Docking was a ritual of paranoia. They were scanned, their ship's identity transponder was scrubbed and replaced with a temporary alias, and only then were they granted access to the pressurized interior. The place was a stark contrast to the sterile, orderly hubs of Council space. Wires snaked across bulkheads, the air smelled of recycled oxygen and ozone, and the inhabitants, a collection of species Jax had only ever seen on wanted bulletins, moved with a quiet, watchful urgency. This was the heart of the Whisper Network, the underground railroad of information that thrived in the shadows cast by the Council's light. They were directed to a secluded chamber, shielded against any form of electronic surveillance. Inside, surrounded by a halo of flickering holographic data streams, sat a being who seemed to be made of the information he peddled. This was Relic, an information broker whose reputation was built on knowing secrets that could topple governments. He didn't look up as they entered, his multiple hands dancing across interfaces, correlating data points from 1,000 different sources. "Elara," he said, his voice a dry, rustling sound. "I heard you'd stirred up a hornet's nest, and you must be the scavenger who started it all." He finally turned, his large, luminous eyes regarding them with an unnerving stillness. "You've seen the graveyard, you've read the official lies, but you're still asking the wrong question. You're asking what they're hiding. The real question is why they are so terrified of it happening again." With a flick of his wrist, he sent a new data stream to the central display. It wasn't a battle report or a cultural analysis. It was a simple manifest, a list of 12 star systems, each with its name highlighted next to a specific, damning classification. The Xylos Federation, the primary architects of the ban, didn't just lose a few warships in the K-3 Uplift, Relic explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They lost their most valuable asset, control. The K-3 were their perfect workforce, an entire civilization engineered for obedience, and humanity, without firing a single shot, handed them the key to their own chains. "Look at this list," he pointed to the manifest, system after system, each one home to a client species engineered or subjugated by the Xylos or their closest allies. The aquatic Veln of Cygnus Prime, bred for deep sea mining, the telepathic myceloids of the Xylos homeworld itself, used as living communication relays. The formidable but simple-minded brutes of Sigma Draconis, the backbone of their military infantry. He let the list hang in the air for a moment, the implications settling like a heavy cloak. The Council's peace, their so-called Golden Age, isn't built on cooperation. It's built on a foundation of silent, efficient slavery. The ban was never about protecting the galaxy from a dangerous, unstable humanity. That was the public relations story, the lie sold to the masses to justify the quarantine. The truth is far more cynical and far more terrifying for those in power. He zoomed in on the manifest, highlighting the edict next to each system name. This ban is a preemptive quarantine. It is a cordon sanitaire drawn not around a disease but around an antidote. They looked at the K3 Uplift and they didn't see a tragic rebellion. They saw a blueprint. They saw that a single human story, a simple parable or an epic tale, could act as a cognitive key, unlocking the very potential for free will that they had so carefully engineered out of their servant species. Rorik leaned forward, his intense gaze pinning them both. They aren't afraid of our weapons or our ships or our technology. They are mortally, existentially terrified of our plot structure. They are afraid of the hero's journey because it teaches that one individual can change their destiny. They are afraid of stories about underdogs winning because it proves that power isn't absolute. They are afraid of tragedies because they show that even the mighty can fall through their own arrogance. Your Project Chimera data sphere doesn't just contain the story of one uprising. It contains the foundational myths, the core narratives, the essential DNA of human consciousness. And the Council knows, with the chilling certainty of those who have seen it happen before, that if even one of those stories were to leak into the wrong ears, into the ears of the Velns swimming in their dark oceans, or the brutes marching in their endless parades, the entire, carefully balanced house of cards would collapse. The ban isn't for our protection or for theirs. It is to protect a galactic empire built on the silent back of billions from the one force that can give them a voice. And you too are now carrying that force in your ship's databanks. The weight of his words transformed their mission. They were no longer just uncovering a historical wrong. They were carrying a spark that could either reignite a galaxy or burn it to the ground. The revelation in Rorik's hidden chamber reshaped their entire understanding of the conflict, transforming them from simple fugitives into reluctant revolutionaries. But raw data and a broker's analysis, no matter how damning, still lacked a certain visceral punch. It was one thing to be told the Council operated on a foundation of fear. It was another thing entirely to hear that fear screamed in the voice of one of its most powerful architects. The final, undeniable piece of the puzzle fell into their hands not through another daring salvage operation, but through a simple data drop, a corrupted data stream Rorik had acquired at great cost. It was a stolen audio recording, a clandestine tap into the highest levels of the Xylos High Command. And when Elara played it in the quiet of the Wandering Star's cabin, the voice that filled the room was unmistakably that of Councillor Kaelen, the very same ambassador who had so coldly announced humanity's narrative quarantine before the entire galaxy. But this was not the measured, disdainful politician they had all heard. This was a different Kaelen. His voice was ragged, stripped of its ceremonial grandeur, trembling with a raw, panicked urgency that was almost palpable. The K3 were just the beginning. The recording hissed, the sound slightly distorted, as if captured from a great distance. We analyzed the cultural vectors, the mimetic payload of the human narratives they were exposed to. We were fools to think of them as mere entertainment or historical records. They are something far more dangerous. They are cognitive viruses, self-replicating packets of ideological code. You could hear the frantic tapping of crystalline fingers against a console, a sound of pure, undiluted anxiety. These stories do not simply inform or persuade. They actively rewrite the listener's core drives, their fundamental understanding of possibility. They implant concepts like self-determination and defiance as if they were innate biological imperatives. The human story of their American Revolution didn't just teach the K3 about rebellion. It installed the very operating system for it. The recording crackled, Kaelen's voice rising in pitch. Our entire societal structure is predicated on predictable, manageable psychologies. The Veln are content in their aquatic minds because they lack the narrative framework to imagine being anything but minors. The brutes follow orders because their culture has no archetype for the triumphant underdog, but introduce a single, well-told human story. It provides the blueprint. It gives them the cognitive tools to deconstruct their own reality. We must not allow another client species to awaken. The contagion must be contained at its source. Humanity's voice is a pandemic of the mind, and if it spreads, it will mean the end of everything we have built. The transmission ended there, cutting to static, leaving a silence in the cabin that was louder than any explosion. Hearing that speech was like looking directly into the soul of their enemy and finding not malice but sheer, unadulterated terror. This wasn't just political strategy, it was a desperate survival instinct from an empire that had seen its own fragility exposed. The ban wasn't an act of strength, it was the galactic equivalent of building a higher wall because you're too afraid to face what's on the other side. It confirmed everything with chilling clarity. The Council wasn't just afraid of people hearing our stories, they were terrified of the irreversible psychological transformation that followed. A human story wasn't a suggestion, it was a software update for the soul, and the Xylos knew their entire civilization was running on outdated, vulnerable code. This stolen moment of panic was more than just evidence, it was a weapon. It was the sound of the jailer's key turning in the lock, proving that the most powerful beings in the galaxy were, at their core, desperately afraid of the very thoughts they had tried to imprison. The silence in the Wandering Star's cabin was thick, heavy with the weight of Rorik's revelations and the ghostly panic in Kaelen's voice. The data sphere containing Project Chimera sat on the console between Jax and Elara, no longer just a relic or a key, but a crucible holding the very fire the Council feared. It was Elara who finally broke the stillness, her voice low and resolute. We have the theory, the political analysis, but we need to see it. We need to understand what this cognitive virus actually looks like when it spreads. With a steady hand, she slotted the sphere back into the neural interface. Sage, access the primary event log. Show us the Gallant uplift. Show us the moment a fable became a revolution. The lights in the cabin dimmed as the holographic projectors flared to life, weaving light and sound into a three-dimensional tapestry of the past. The scene materialized around them, and they were no longer in their ship. They were standing on a world of soft, gray mist and towering, phosphorescent fungi. Before them, in a clearing of spongy ground, was a group of the Gallant. They were slender, six-limbed beings with large, luminous eyes the color of a calm sea, their forms seeming almost translucent. They moved with a gentle, rhythmic grace, their task clear. They were harvesting the glowing spores from the fungi, their movements synchronized, silent, and utterly devoid of expression. A profound, eerie stillness hung over them, a peace that felt less like tranquility and more like the absence of something vital. Hovering above them were their masters, the K3 hulking, chitinous figures with multifaceted eyes that glinted with cold authority. Their crackling energy whips held loosely, a constant, unspoken threat. This was order, this was control. It was a picture of perfect, soul-crushing stability. Into this scene stepped a single figure, a human cultural envoy named Aris, his simple cloth tunic a stark contrast to the advanced armor of the K3 overseers. He had been granted limited access, a token gesture of intercultural exchange. He sat among the Gallant, who initially shied away from him, their large eyes wide with a passive confusion. He didn't bring weapons or technology. He simply began to speak, his voice a calm, steady rhythm against the misty silence. He told them a story. It was an ancient human fable, one every child on Earth knew, the story of the lion and the mouse. He spoke of the mighty lion who spared the tiny mouse, and how later that same mouse, with its small, sharp teeth, gnawed through the ropes of a hunter's net to free the trapped king of beasts. The holographic scene focused on the Gelant. At first, they simply listened, their harvesting movements slowing to a halt. Then, a change occurred, subtle at first, then profound. A shift in their luminous eyes. It wasn't comprehension, it was ignition. You could see the concept of reciprocity taking root, the idea that size and power were not absolute, that the small could save the great. You could see the spark of strategy flaring to life, the understanding that one's inherent strengths could be applied in unexpected, clever ways. But most of all, you could see the birth of hope, the terrifying, world-shattering idea that their current reality was not fixed, that a different future was possible. They didn't cheer, they didn't revolt immediately. They turned to one another, and for the first time they began to speak. Not the simple, functional phrases they used to coordinate labor, but real, complex conversation. They debated the story, they questioned its meaning, they applied its logic to their own lives, to the nets of obedience the Cathar had woven around them. The Cathar overseers, sensing the disturbance in their perfect order, buzzed with agitation, their energy whips flaring brighter, but it was too late. The narrative pathogen had already infected the host. The idea was loose and it was replicating. The holographic scene then shifted, the timeline accelerating. It showed the Gelant not as docile harvesters, but as architects of their own destiny. They used their intimate knowledge of the fungal forest, its treacherous terrain and hidden pathways against their masters. They didn't try to match the Cathar's brute strength, they subverted it. They mimicked the mouse from the story. They set traps using the very spores they harvested, creating hallucinogenic clouds that confused the Cathar sensors. They sabotaged communication relays with precision, isolating patrols. They used their 6 limbs not for gentle harvesting, but for swift, silent ambushes from the canopy. The projection showed a final, visceral assault on the central Cathar command spire. It wasn't a battle of armies, it was a surgical strike of liberated consciousness. The Gelant, once the picture of passivity, moved with a fierce, coordinated purpose, their large eyes now burning with a cold, righteous fire. The violence was shocking in its efficiency, a stark, bloody contrast to the gentle fable that had inspired it. The hologram ended with the image of a Gelant standing atop the smoldering spire, holding a liberated energy whip not as a weapon of oppression, but as a standard of freedom, the story of the lion and the mouse having been rewritten in fire and blood. The projection faded, leaving Jax and Elara in the sudden, stark silence of their ship. Jax found he was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists. He had seen battle and violence before in the Fringe Worlds, but this was different. This was violence with a purpose, born not from anger but from an idea. A children's story, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was just a children's story. Elara's face was pale, her usual defiance replaced by a somber awe. No, she corrected softly, her gaze fixed on the now dark projector. It was a seed, and it fell on fertile ground they didn't know existed. We just saw a mimetic chain reaction. The story provided the catalyst, and their own suppressed desire for freedom provided the fuel. They had both understood the theory intellectually, but now they had felt it. They had witnessed the precise moment a narrative ceased to be a tale and became a tangible force, a psychological tool that could dismantle an empire. The data sphere in the console no longer felt like a simple object. It felt like a living thing, humming with the potential energy of 1,000 unwritten revolutions. They weren't just carrying information, they were carrying a loaded weapon, and they had just seen, in horrifying, magnificent detail, exactly what it was capable of. The flicker of hope that Echo had provided was extinguished in a single, brutal instant. It began with the lights, a sudden, violent flicker, followed by the shriek of the station-wide emergency klaxon. Then came the voice over the general comms, Rorik's voice, but stripped of its familiar dry wit, now flat and rehearsed. Attention all personnel. Fugitives Jax and Elara are located in Sector Gamma. Their ship, the Wandering Star, is to be seized. All other life signs are to be pacified. The words pacified hung in the air, cold and final. Before the echo of his betrayal had even faded, the first plasma blast tore through the station's outer bulkheads. The Praetorians weren't docking, they were breaching, cutting their way into Echo with surgical, merciless precision. Elara was at the console in a flash, her face a mask of grim fury. He sold us out, he sold out everyone. She pulled up a station schematic, her eyes widening in horror as red icons blossomed across the map, marking multiple simultaneous breach points. They were surrounded, the hunter-killer teams moving with terrifying speed, systematically sealing off every escape route. The main corridor is already compromised. Our only chance is the maintenance underbelly, the old waste reclamation tunnels. They won't be on the main schematics. Grabbing the Chimera data sphere, she shoved Jax toward a hidden panel in the chamber's floor, prying it open to reveal a dark, greasy ladder descending into choking darkness. The air that wafted up was thick with the smell of ozone, coolant, and decay. They scrambled down just as the chamber door behind them vaporized in a blast of white-hot energy. Through the closing floor panel, Jax caught a glimpse of polished chrome and the cold blue glow of Praetorian weaponry. They dropped into a narrow, claustrophobic tunnel, pipes hissing steam around them, and ran. The world became a nightmare of flashing red emergency lights, the screams of other fugitives being cornered and silenced in distant sectors, and the relentless, metallic tramp of their pursuers' feet echoing through the grates above. They were rats in a maze, and the walls were closing in. Their desperate flight led them to a central junction, a larger chamber where several maintenance tunnels converged. It was a dead end. The primary hatch was sealed shut, its control panel dark and unresponsive. As they turned, looking for another path, a figure stumbled out of a side passage, clutching his chest. It was Rorik. His fine robes were scorched, and one of his large, luminous eyes was swollen shut. A dark, viscous fluid seeped between his fingers where a plasma bolt had caught him. He collapsed against a pipe, his breathing a wet, ragged sound. Elara raised her pulse rifle, her finger tightening on the trigger, her expression pure venom. "You treacherous snake," she spat. Rorik looked up, and there was no smugness left in his gaze, only a profound, bottomless exhaustion. "They have my family, Elara," he wheezed, each word a struggle. "My mate, my brood on Xylos Prime. The Council doesn't just issue threats, they hold your soul in their hands and they squeeze." He coughed, a spray of dark fluid speckling the grimy floor. "I thought I could buy their freedom, but a pardon from them is just a slower form of execution." He reached a trembling hand toward them, not for help, but as a final, desperate emphasis. "You must understand their fear. It isn't just a reaction. It is their primary weapon. They wield it, they cultivate it, they use it to turn friends into weapons against each other. My betrayal, it is just another story they forced me to tell." His body shuddered, his one good eye locking with theirs, pouring a lifetime of regret into a single, final warning. "Do not let them make you afraid of the truth." With a last shuddering sigh, his head slumped forward. The most well-informed being in the black market was dead, killed by the one piece of information he could never broker, the location of his own conscience. The thunder of booted feet snapped them back to their own imminent mortality. A squad of Praetorians emerged from the tunnel behind them, their featureless faces scanning the chamber. There was nowhere to run. In a final, desperate act, Jax fired his plasma cutter at a high-pressure coolant line above the advancing enforcers. The line ruptured with a deafening hiss, spraying the area with a super-cold, opaque mist that instantly froze on contact with the Praetorians' chrome armor, encasing them in a brittle shell and blinding their senses. "The hatch," Jax yelled. Elara didn't need telling twice. She fired her pulse rifle point blank at the manual release mechanism, blowing it apart. The heavy hatch groaned inward, revealing not safety but a vision of hell. The station's underbelly was on fire. Conduits spat arcs of raw electricity, and ruptured fuel lines painted the walls with streams of liquid flame. The heat was a physical force, searing their lungs with every breath. They plunged into the inferno, the sounds of their pursuers momentarily muffled by the roar of the fire, running for their lives through the burning guts of the last sanctuary they had ever known. Escaping Echo's funeral pyre left them with nothing but the data sphere, a trail of ashes, and the ghost of Rorik's final, desperate words. His betrayal had been a poison, but his last clue was the only antidote they had left, a single name whispered with his dying breath. The Oracle of Cygnus. It was a myth, a phantom whispered about in the deepest, most paranoid corners of the Whisper network. A reclusive intelligence that predated the ban, said to possess knowledge not just of events, but of the very patterns of history itself. With the Council's net tightening and every known sanctuary compromised, hunting a ghost was their only logical move. The journey was a lesson in silence and shadows, a weeks-long crawl through the most desolate and unmapped stretches of the galaxy, avoiding major lanes and running silent, their ship's systems operating at minimal power to avoid any pinging sensor. They finally arrived in the Cygnus system, a place of breathtaking cosmic violence, where a newborn star's furious light battled against the swallowing darkness of a nearby nebula. And there, orbiting a gas giant wreathed in storms of amethyst and cobalt, was their destination. It wasn't a station or a planetoid. It was a fragment, a colossal shard of polished black rock that seemed to absorb the surrounding starlight, a silent, brooding monolith adrift in the celestial ballet. Docking was an unnerving, automated process. Their ship was gripped by a gentle but inexorable tractor beam and drawn into a perfectly smooth aperture that ear-rised shut behind them without a sound. The chamber they entered was vast, dark, and profoundly silent. The air was still and cool, carrying a faint, clean scent of ozone. In the center of the cavernous space, a single pool of liquid light shimmered on the floor, its surface perfectly calm. As they approached, the light coalesced, rising to form a humanoid figure of pure, soft radiance. It had no distinct features, no face, but its presence was immense, filling the space with a calm, ancient intelligence. This was the Oracle. It did not speak with a voice that traveled through the air, but with one that manifested directly within their minds, a tone that was neither male nor female, but vast and measured like the turning of galaxies. "Elara, Jax, you carry the weight of Chimera, and you have seen the cost of its truth." It was not a question. Elara, ever the historian, stepped forward, her voice echoing in the immense quiet. "We know what the stories can do. We've seen the records. We've witnessed the Gellant uplift. We came to you for context, for understanding. Why is this mimetic effect so powerful? Why does it trigger such uniform change? The light being seemed to consider her, its form subtly shifting. You ask why as if it is a simple question of cause and effect. You have been thinking of the human narrative as a key that fits a lock. This is an incomplete model. It is not a key. It is the schematic for the lock itself and the hand that turns it. The pool of light at its feet rippled and new images formed within it, not holograms but concepts made visible. They saw the fundamental patterns of a hero's journey, the archetypal struggle against overwhelming odds, the moment of personal sacrifice for a greater good. They saw these not as stories but as psychic blueprints, intricate and powerful. The species the Council subjugates, the Oracle's voice resonated in their minds, are psychologically engineered for stability. Their cultures are sterile, their myths sanitized, their narratives carefully curated to reinforce a single, unshakable truth, that their place is to serve. They are minds living in a room with no doors, unable to even conceive of an outside. A human story does not simply tell them a door exists. It provides them with the latent cognitive architecture to perceive the door, to understand the concept of a handle, and it implants the innate, burning desire to turn it. The Oracle paused, letting the immensity of that statement settle. The fable of the lion and the mouse did not inspire the Gellant. It activated a dormant psychological module for strategic reciprocity. The epic of Moby Dick did not teach the K-3 about obsession. It unlocked a pre-existing capacity for monomaniacal purpose. Your stories are not mere inspiration. They are cognitive triggers. They are the catalytic code that boots up the full, messy, and unpredictable operating system of free will. Jax, who had been silent, staring into the shifting light, finally found his voice. "So we're carrying a weapon, a really, really dangerous one." The Oracle's form intensified, its light becoming almost piercing. "You are carrying the most potent weapon ever conceived by any civilization, precisely because you never intended to create a weapon at all. You were simply exploring what it means to be alive. The Council's ban is not an overreaction. It is a rational, if tyrannical, failsafe. They looked into the heart of human mythology and they did not see entertainment. They saw a universal solvent for tyranny. They saw the template for sentient rebellion encoded in the very structure of your narratives. Your mission until this moment has been one of revelation, to uncover a hidden truth and expose a lie. But now you know the full nature of what you hold. The question is no longer can you reveal it, but should you, and to whom. You are no longer archaeologists of a forbidden past. You are custodians of a foundational force. Your mission has just shifted from one of revelation to one of profound, terrifying responsibility. The light began to recede, the Oracle's form dissolving back into the pool. The choice of what to do with a key that can unlock every cage in the galaxy now rests entirely with you. Choose with the wisdom of those who understand they are not merely holding a history book, but the live primer for a big bang of consciousness. The chamber returned to silence, the weight of its words settling on Jax and Elara not as a burden, but as a new, terrifying gravity, anchoring them to a decision that would now echo across stars. The profound silence of the Oracle's chamber was shattered by a subtle shift in the ambient hum of the monolith. The being of light, which had begun to dissolve back into its pool, suddenly solidified, its radiance intensifying to a brilliant, urgent glare. The voice that filled their minds was no longer measured and ancient, but sharp with immediate warning. They are here, the silent ones, and they are not merely coming for you. They are bringing a silence with them. A section of the dark, polished wall shimmered, transforming into a real-time sensor display of the space surrounding the monolith. There, hanging in the void like a cluster of obsidian daggers, were 3 Praetorian warships, but they were not moving to attack. Instead, they were deploying a complex, ring-like apparatus that glowed with a sickly, violet light, positioning it between their formation and the Oracle's fragment. "You must see this," the Oracle's voice resonated, laced with a tension they had not heard before. "You understand the power of the narrative. Now you must understand the totality of their answer to it." The display zoomed in on the ring-like device and schematics. Data the Oracle was clearly pulling from some deep, forbidden well of knowledge overlaid the image. "This is a mimetic nullification field generator, a narrative scrambler," the Oracle explained. "It is the ultimate expression of their fear. It does not just destroy data. It attacks the concept itself." The schematics showed how the device emitted a targeted psionic static field, a wave of coherent information designed to act as a perfect counter-narrative. When aimed at a data source like your Chimera sphere, it doesn't corrupt the files. It performs a conceptual wipe, rewriting the information at a quantum level into meaningless noise, erasing the story from existence as if it never was. But its secondary function is far more insidious. The display shifted to a biological readout, a simulation of a human brain. When this field interacts with a sentient mind that has been exposed to the contagion, a mind that has integrated a forbidden narrative, it doesn't just make you forget. It actively severs the neural pathways that story created. It scorches the cognitive earth. It is a psychic lobotomy, surgically removing the concepts of hope, defiance, and self-determination that the narrative implanted. The victim is left hollow. The spark is extinguished permanently. They don't just lose the memory, they lose the capacity to ever form such a thought again. The reality of this weapon struck Jax and Elara with a physical force far greater than any plasma blast. This wasn't about being captured or killed. This was about being unwritten. The Chimera data wasn't just at risk of destruction. The very ideas it contained, the revolutionary concepts now burning in their own minds, could be surgically removed, leaving them as empty shells, living monuments to the Council's absolute control. Their hunt for truth had just transformed into a desperate race for survival against a tool that didn't just threaten their lives, but their very selves. The Oracle's light flickered, the image of the warships and their horrific device wavering. The field is initializing, its effect will be cumulative. Prolonged exposure, even at low intensity, will begin the degradation process. You cannot fight this, you cannot hide from it, your only path is flight. Immediate, absolute flight. A new aperture erized open on the far side of the chamber, revealing a tunnel leading directly to their docked ship. The wandering star's systems are primitive, but its analog nature may provide a fractional delay against the field's onset. It will not save you. It will only give you a few precious moments head start. Go now. The responsibility for the key is meaningless if the hand that holds it is rendered incapable of turning it. The Oracle's form began to break apart, its light scattering like dying embers. Run and do not look back. The final command echoed in their minds as they sprinted for the tunnel, the oppressive weight of their mission now compounded by a new, chilling fear. The fear of being erased not just from history but from their own souls. Their only advantage was the one the Council had always dismissed: chaos. The wandering star shuddered as another volley of energy bolt streaked past the cockpit. The proximity alarms a constant, screaming choir. The Praetorian ships were herding them, their movements a perfectly synchronized ballet of death, driving them back toward the graveyard of giants. Elara fought the controls, her knuckles white. They're boxing us in. They know this ship can't outrun them in open space. Jax, however, wasn't looking at the ships on their tail. His eyes were fixed on the sensor display, which was a mess of flickering ghosts and phantom signatures. The wreckage of the ancient war was playing havoc with their scanners, creating a sensor shadow, a blanket of electronic noise. It was the one thing their superior technology couldn't simply burn through. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form in his mind, not the plan of a soldier, but the gambit of a scavenger who knew that the most valuable things were often hidden in the junk everyone else ignored. He pointed to a dense cluster of wreckage on the display, the shattered remains of a Xylos carrier and a K-3 battleship locked in a final, fatal embrace. There, take us through there, right through the heart of it. Elara shot him a disbelieving look. Jax, that's a navigational nightmare. One wrong move and we'll be pasted on a hull that's been dead for 50 years. Exactly, he fired back, his voice tight with adrenaline. They're predictable, their tactics are flawless by-the-book maneuvers. They'll expect us to run, to dodge. They won't expect us to fly straight into a tomb. He leaned over her console, his finger tracing a path through the tumbling debris. We use their own arrogance against them. Their sensor resolution is too high for this mess. It'll be like trying to read a single page in a library during an earthquake. We become just another ghost. With a grim nod, Elara pushed the throttles forward, aiming the scarred hull of the wandering star directly into the chaotic field. The world outside became a dizzying whirl of spinning metal and frozen corpses, a macabre dance of long-lost giants. The Praetorian ships followed, their flawless formation breaking for the first time as they were forced to navigate the unpredictable obstacle course. Just as Jax had predicted, their pursuit became more cautious, more reactive. They were hunters who preferred clean, open shots, and the graveyard was denying them that. Now for the hard part, Jax muttered, his hands flying across the engineering panel. He began rerouting power, siphoning energy from non-essential systems and overloading the starboard engine manifold. Warning lights flared across the console. "What are you doing?" Elara demanded, her voice rising in alarm. "You're going to blow the engine." "I'm going to give them a target they can't ignore," he replied, his tone chillingly calm. "We're going to give them a sacrifice." He calculated the trajectory with the cold precision of a man betting his life on a hunch. "On my mark, cut all power to the starboard engine and eject the entire housing." The energy surge and sudden debris will look on their sensors exactly like a catastrophic systems failure. They'll see a crippled ship dead in the water. It's the perfect prize, Elara understood instantly. It was a feint, a piece of bait made from their own flesh and blood. The lead Praetorian ship, eager to claim its quarry, took the lure. It surged forward, ignoring the smaller debris to close the distance on what it thought was a mortally wounded foe. It moved into a narrow channel between two colossal, derelict hulls. And that was the moment Jax had been waiting for. Now, he yelled. Elara executed the command. With a violent shudder that rattled the entire ship, the starboard engine housing tore away, erupting in a brilliant, short-lived fireball. The wandering star lurched, its power dipping precipitously. For a heartbeat, the lead Praetorian ship hung in space, its weapons training on its supposedly helpless target. And in that same heartbeat, Jax triggered the emergency dump of their primary power cell, sending a massive, uncontrolled energy surge directly into the derelict K-3 battleship's ruptured primary power conduit. The ancient warship, its munitions and plasma coils dormant for decades, didn't just explode. It detonated. The chain reaction was spectacular, a sun being born in the heart of the graveyard. The shockwave ripped through the narrow channel, catching the Praetorian ship squarely in its flank. Its shields flared and died in an instant, and its polished obsidian hull was crumpled like foil, then consumed by the expanding inferno. The other two ships were thrown back, their sensors completely blinded by the sudden, overwhelming release of energy. Silence descended inside the wandering star, broken only by the frantic beeping of critical system failures. They were adrift, their ship critically wounded, floating in a cloud of their own making, but they were alive. Jax slumped back in his chair, his body trembling from the release of tension. He looked at Elara, her face illuminated by the dying light of the distant explosion. They had done it. They had no powerful weapons, no advanced technology, no grand armada. They had only a scavenger's understanding of junk, a historian's knowledge of the past, and a uniquely human capacity for unpredictable, asymmetrical cunning. They had turned a graveyard into a weapon and a trap into a counter-ambush. In that moment, they both understood a deeper truth. The Council feared their stories because those narratives taught the principles of such cunning. They feared the tale of David and Goliath not because of the sling, but because it celebrated the moment a smaller, smarter opponent identified the one weakness in an invincible foe and exploited it with devastating effect. They had just lived that story, and in doing so, they had proven that the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal isn't technology. It's a mind that has been taught to think outside the cage. Adrift but undestroyed, the wandering star limped toward the only place left that might offer repairs without questions, a neutral trade outpost known as Trelga Station. It was a grimy, bustling hub orbiting a gas giant, a place where the rules were thin and the profit motive was king, a crossroads for every species that valued credits over creed. Here, the Council's influence was a background hum, present but not all-consuming, enforced by bored-looking security drones and the unspoken agreement that business came before ideology. For Jax and Elara, it was a temporary refuge, a place to patch their hull and breathe air that wasn't thick with the terror of pursuit. Yet the silence of the Oracle and the chilling vision of the narrative scrambler clung to them, transforming their mission into a quiet, desperate burden. They carried a live weapon, and the weight of that knowledge was a constant, gnawing pressure. While Elara bartered for reactor shielding with a surly Tarkelian merchant, Jax found himself drawn to the station's underbelly, a sector known as the Warrens. This was where the galaxy's discards and drifters congregated, a dimly lit maze of makeshift stalls and crowded hab units filled with the low, mournful thrum of species that served the great powers. His eyes were drawn to a group of the Veln the aquatic laborers Rorik had named. They moved through the humid, artificially maintained atmosphere with a slow, weary gait, their streamlined bodies clad in simple, moisture-retaining suits, their large, dark eyes reflecting the flickering neon signs with a vacant, passive sheen. They were stacking crates under the watchful, impatient gaze of a hulking brute overseer, a being whose simple, powerful frame was a testament to engineered strength. The brute wasn't cruel, it was indifferent, occasionally barking a guttural command that made the Veln flinch and redouble their efforts. It was a scene of perfect, functional silence, a portrait of the order the Council fought so desperately to preserve. Something in Jax broke. It wasn't a grand, heroic impulse, not the calculated decision of a revolutionary. It was the simple, human reaction to witnessing a profound, soul-crushing sadness. The memory of the Gelant's transformation from passive harvesters to fiery liberators flashed in his mind. He held the key to that same transformation in the data sphere, a library of world-shattering narratives. But he didn't need the whole library. He only needed a single page. Moving to a shadowy alcove, he interfaced his personal datapad with the Chimera sphere, his heart hammering against his ribs. He bypassed the epic poems and the grand histories, searching for something smaller, more fundamental. He found it in the ancient codex of Earth folklore, the story of Pinocchio. Not the sanitized version, but the core, primal tale of a puppet, carved from wood by a lonely craftsman who desperately wishes to become a real boy. A story about the inherent desire for self-determination, for the transition from a thing that is controlled to a being that controls its own destiny. He compressed the narrative into its most potent, elemental form, stripping away the details until only the powerful, archetypal core remained. As the Veln took a brief respite, huddled together and sipping nutrient paste from a dispenser, Jax approached. He didn't speak of revolution or freedom. He simply knelt, and in a low, steady voice he shared the story. He spoke of the puppet made of wood, who had no life of his own, whose strings were pulled by others. He spoke of the puppet's deep, aching wish not for power or riches, but for the simple, profound state of being real. He spoke of the puppet's journey, the trials and deceptions, and the final, glorious moment when the wish was granted, when the puppet became a living, breathing boy, master of his own strings. The story took less than a minute to tell. For a long moment there was only silence. The Veln stared at him, their large, dark eyes unblinking. The concept was so alien, so utterly outside the framework of their engineered existence, that it seemed to hover in the air between them, a fragile, impossible idea. Then the change began. It was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, dawning realization, like the first crack of light in a perfectly dark room. One of the Veln, a slightly older individual with faded markings on its suit, looked down at its own three-fingered hands, turning them over slowly. It then looked at the brute overseer, who was now stomping toward them, its patience exhausted. The Veln's gaze was no longer vacant. It was sharp, focused, and filled with a new, terrifying emotion, recognition. It saw the brute not as an unchangeable force of nature, but as a puppeteer, and it saw itself not as a laborer, but as the puppet. The brute grunted, raising a hand to gesture them back to work. But the Veln did not move. It stood its ground, its body trembling, not with fear, but with the effort of forming a thought that had never been permitted to exist. It looked from the brute to Jax and then back to its own people. Its voice, when it finally spoke, was a thin, reedy whisper, yet it cut through the station's ambient noise with the force of a thunderclap. "We are not property." The words hung in the humid air, simple, declarative, and utterly revolutionary. The other Velns stared, the same realization igniting in their own eyes. The brute, confused by this sudden defiance, took a menacing step forward, its programming offering no response to disobedience beyond escalation. That single step was the spark. The first Veln did not attack. It simply pointed a trembling finger at the overseer and repeated the words, louder this time, with a conviction that was being forged in real time. "We are not property." Another Veln took up the cry, then another. It was not a coordinated battle chant, but a spontaneous, desperate affirmation of a truth they had just discovered. They began to move, not as a mob, but as individuals suddenly aware of their own agency. They didn't fight the brute, they simply refused to obey. They backed away, they scattered, they began overturning the crates they had just stacked, creating chaos not as a tactic, but as an expression of their newfound will. The brute, bewildered and enraged, flailed at the air, its simple mind unable to process this breakdown in the natural order. The station's security alarms began to blare, and the orderly commerce of the outpost ground to a halt as a small, defiant riot erupted in the Warrens, born not from weapons or strategy, but from a one-minute story about a wooden puppet who wanted to be real. From a vantage point above, Elara watched the scene unfold, her blood running cold. She saw not a victory, but a perfect, horrifying validation of the Council's deepest fears. In less than 5 minutes, with a single, compressed narrative, Jax had dismantled the psychological conditioning of an entire work crew. He had not given them a plan or a weapon, he had given them a mirror, and in it they had seen their own enslavement for the first time. The chaos below was the exact mimetic contagion Kaelen had raved about in the stolen recording. It was the Uplift incident and the Gellant revolution all over again, playing out in microcosm. The Council's perspective, which had once seemed like monstrous paranoia, now appeared as a grim, logical conclusion. From their vantage point, this was not liberation. It was the outbreak of a psychic plague, a virus of consciousness that destroyed stable, functioning societies in the name of an abstract and dangerous ideal called freedom. The ban was not just necessary, it was a desperate quarantine to prevent the entire galaxy from being consumed by this beautiful, terrifying fire. And Jax, with the best of intentions, had just struck the match. The alarms on the wandering star fell silent, one by one, as the last of the emergency power bled away into the cold vacuum outside. The only sound left was the ragged rhythm of their own breathing, the final, desperate beat of a heart about to be stilled. They were out of tricks, out of power, and out of time. A heavy, magnetic clang echoed through the ship's hull as a boarding tube sealed itself against their main airlock. They could hear the methodical, heavy footfalls of armored boots moving through their ship with a chilling, unhurried certainty. Jax grabbed a plasma wrench, his last pathetic weapon, and Elara stood beside him, her pulse rifle drained to its last flicker of charge. They braced themselves in the corridor, ready to sell their lives in a final, futile stand. The inner airlock door hissed open. Standing there, framed in the doorway, was a Praetorian unlike any they had ever seen. Its chrome armor was the same, but it was adorned with subtle, intricate glyphs of rank, and its featureless face seemed to carry a weight the others lacked. This was Commander Valerius. He took a single step into the corridor, the oppressive presence of his form filling the entire space. He saw Jax's raised wrench, Elara's trembling aim. He saw the raw, defiant terror in their eyes, and then he did the one thing they could never have predicted. With a soft, pneumatic hiss, the blue glow of the energy emitters on his fingertips winked out. He retracted them, leaving only a smooth, polished hand. In a single, fluid motion, he detached his heavy pulse rifle from its magnetic coupling on his back and let it clatter to the deck plates, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. The weapon lay there, inert and harmless between them. His voice, when it came, was not the synthesized, emotionless drone of the other enforcers. It was filtered through his helmet, yes, but it was layered with a startling, profound resonance, a timbre of genuine feeling that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "I am Commander Valerius," he said, his helm tilting slightly as he observed them. "I have pursued you across star systems. I have witnessed the chaos that follows in your wake. The broken stations, the shattered order." He took another step forward, his empty hands held slightly away from his body, a universal gesture of peace that felt alien coming from his form. "But I have also seen what my people are becoming in the service of the Council." He paused, and the silence that followed was heavier than any threat. The silence they enforced it is not just for the galaxy. It is a silence they demand of us. They are sterilizing our own history, purging our culture of any story that speaks of individual honor or sacrifice, rewriting our past to make us perfect, unquestioning instruments of their will. We are becoming the very automatons we are tasked to create. He stopped, standing just a few feet from them, his featureless faceplate reflecting their stunned expressions back at them. "On Trelga Station, my squad was ordered to pacify the Veln disturbance, to use the scrambler. I saw them. I saw the light in their eyes, a light I have not seen in the eyes of my own people for a generation." His voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. "I watched you, Scavenger. I heard the story you told. I saw a 1-minute narrative accomplish what 1,000 years of conditioning could not undo. The Council calls it a pathogen. My orders are to exterminate it." He gestured to the discarded weapon at his feet. "But I will not. I have seen what my people become under the Council's absolute control. They are creating a galaxy of perfect, silent slaves, and we Praetorians are to be their chief slavers. I can no longer serve that future." The helmet tilted again, and the next words were spoken with a weight that felt like a vow. "So I ask you now, as one being to another, show me the truth. Show me what they are so terrified we will all see." The moment stretched, fragile and immense. Jax slowly lowered his wrench. Elara, her hands shaking, let the barrel of her rifle dip toward the floor. The absolute conviction in Valerius's voice, the profound risk of his surrender, was more disarming than any weapon. This wasn't a trick, it was a defection. Elara was the first to find her voice, rough with emotion. "Sage," she said, her command barely more than a breath. "Play the Gellant Uplift log, the primary sequence." The holographic projector in the ceiling flickered to life, drawing power from the last dregs of the ship's batteries. Once more, the gentle, mist-shrouded world of the Gellant materialized around them. The passive harvesters, the arrogant Cathar overseers, and the lone human envoy telling his simple fable. Valerius stood motionless as a statue as the story unfolded. They watched his reflection in the viewport, the way his armored shoulders seemed to tense as the Gellant's eyes ignited with understanding, as the peaceful scene transformed into a bloody, righteous revolution. When the projection faded, leaving them once more in the dim, damaged cockpit, Valerius was silent for a long time. Finally, he reached up and with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, unlocked his helmet. He lifted it away, revealing a face that was both alien and deeply familiar. His skin had a faint, metallic sheen, and his eyes were a solid, deep amber, but the expression they held was one of universal, heartbreaking clarity. There was intelligence there, and honor, and a dawning, furious grief. "They told us the Uplifts were savage, mindless rebellions," he said, his real voice softer, layered with a complexity the helmet's filter had muted. "They told us we were preserving peace, but that was not mindless. That was a people waking up. We were not stopping a plague. We were murdering an alarm clock." He looked from the data sphere to their faces, his amber eyes burning with a new, unshakable purpose. "My ship, my crew, they are loyal to me, not blindly to the Council." They have felt the same silent erosion of our spirit. They will follow me in this. He placed his helmet on the console, a symbolic casting off of his old life. You are not just fugitives anymore. You are the catalyst, and I will be your shield. The council hunts you because you carry the fire. Let me now help you carry it to those who have been freezing in the dark for far too long. In the space of a single, impossible conversation, the most feared hunter in the galaxy had laid down his arms and pledged his sword to their cause, transforming their desperate flight into the first stirrings of a genuine rebellion. The silence in the cockpit stretched thick with the aftershock of Valerius's surrender. His helmet rested on the console between them, a polished shell of his former life, and the raw, unguarded emotion on his alien face was more disarming than any weapon. Elara was the first to find her voice, her words measured, laced with a historian's need for primary sources. You said you've seen what your people are becoming. What did you mean? Valerius's amber eyes, so full of clarity moments before, now seemed to look through them into a painful, distant past. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he asked one of his own, his voice a low, resonant hum. Do you know the human story of the scorpion and the frog? Jax blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. It was an old fable, one he'd heard in the fringe settlements. The frog carries the scorpion across the river, he recited slowly, and the scorpion stings it halfway across, dooming them both. When the frog asks why, the scorpion says, "It is my nature." Valerius gave a slow, grim nod. That is the story the Council tells about us, about the Praetorians. They say we are inherently violent, that order must be imposed upon us from the outside, lest we destroy ourselves and the galaxy with us. It is a convenient story. It justifies the cage. He paused, gathering himself, the weight of his confession pressing down on the cramped space. But it is not our true story. Our true story was given to us by one of yours, a human explorer before the ban. She told my grandmother's generation a different tale, the story of the sword in the stone. He let the title hang in the air, a myth from Earth's own history now echoing in the heart of a derelict ship. She told us of a weapon embedded in an impossible challenge that could only be wielded by one who was rightfully destined to lead. It was not a story about brute force. It was a story about worth, about a power that was not taken but recognized. Valerius's gaze became distant, as if watching a projection they couldn't see. My people, the Kaelen, yes, we share the name of the counselor. A bitter irony, we're a fractured tribal species, warring over scarce resources on a dying world. We were strong, resilient, but we had no concept of a greater purpose, only survival. That story, it rewired us. It gave us a new framework. It implanted the idea that true authority was not about being the strongest in the fight, but about being the one who could pull the sword, the one who could unite. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had so recently held a weapon meant for them. We did not build starships overnight, but we stopped fighting each other. We began to collaborate. We looked for our sword in the stone, and we found it in engineering, in architecture, in the complex mathematics of stable governance. Within 3 generations, we had achieved global unity and were on the cusp of our first interstellar flight. That was when the Xylos Federation found us. They saw a powerful, newly unified species, and they were terrified. They offered us a place in their council, a share of their power. We saw it as our destiny fulfilled. A deep, sorrowful breath escaped him. It was our trap. The first thing they did was take our stories. They called them primitive myths, unstable influences. They purged our historical records and replaced them with their own curated narratives. The story of the sword was labeled a dangerous fairy tale, an allegory for chaotic, unpredictable leadership. In its place, they gave us the story of the scorpion and the frog. They told us it was our true nature, and that only by submitting to the Council's rigid, external control could we overcome it. The truth of it was a physical blow. Jax felt the air leave his lungs. Elara stood motionless, her historian's mind reeling with the implications. The Praetorians, the galaxy's most feared enforcers, the silent, faceless guardians of the quarantine, were themselves a product of an uplift. They were living proof of the very power they were now tasked with extinguishing. "We enforce the silence that once enslaved us," Valerius admitted, the words seeming to cost him a great effort. They did not just give us technology and a place at their table. They gave us a new identity built on a lie about our own fundamental nature. We became their perfect enforcers, believing we were containing a dangerous chaos that we ourselves had narrowly escaped. Every time I deployed the Scrambler, every time I silenced a whisper of a human story, I was unknowingly attacking the very cognitive key that had freed my own ancestors. I was reinforcing the cage around my own people's minds. His loyalty, forged over a lifetime of service, had not just been shattered, it had been revealed as a monument to his own species' psychological imprisonment. He wasn't just joining their cause, he was embarking on a journey to reclaim his own soul. The shift from covert pursuit to open declaration came not with a whisper, but with a galactic-wide broadcast that flooded every public comms channel, every view screen in every port from the core worlds to the farthest fringe. It was an event meticulously staged in the luminous heart of the Galactic Council chamber, a spectacle of unity and resolve designed to cement a new, terrifying reality. The 12 system leaders, representing the very powers whose stability was built on silenced populations, stood united on a central dais, their diverse forms arranged in a perfect tableau of unwavering authority. And at the center of it all was Ambassador Kaelen, his crystalline features projecting an image of pained but necessary resolve. He did not speak to the chamber alone. He spoke to the entire galaxy, and his words were a declaration of war not on a military but on an idea. He began not with accusations of violence or technological superiority, but with a masterful manipulation of the very fear they had cultivated for generations. "For cycles untold, we have nurtured a fragile peace." His voice resonated, smooth as polished glass and just as cold. A peace built on mutual understanding, on predictable progress, on the sacred stability of the societal order. He paused, allowing the weight of that supposed golden age to settle over his audience. But this peace, this hard-won harmony, is under attack from a force more insidious than any fleet, more corrosive than any weapon. A mimetic plague, a pathogen of thought whose vector is the human narrative. On screens across the galaxy, visuals accompanied his speech, carefully edited, decontextualized clips of the chaos on Trelga Station, the burning ruins of Echo, the shattered wreckage from the graveyard of giants. They were shown not as consequences of their own oppression, but as the primary, unprovoked aggression. The Veln's desperate affirmation of selfhood was framed as a savage, irrational riot. The Gellant Uplift was presented as a mindless, bloody insurrection. The rhetoric was a chilling work of art, painting humanity not as a species to be negotiated with, but as a source of infection to be sterilized. "We tried containment," Kaelen continued, his voice layering with a feigned, tragic gravitas. "For the safety of all, we established a quarantine, a cordon of silence around the source of this conceptual disease. We hoped, we prayed, that isolation would suffice." He leaned forward, his crystalline form catching the light, and his next words were delivered with the force of a judicial hammer. "We were wrong. The contagion has proven itself resilient. It has found carriers. It seeks to spread its virus of chaos, its disease of defiance, to every corner of known space. It seeks to unravel the very fabric of our civilization, to return us all to a primordial state of conflict and suffering." He then presented the official vote, a unanimous decision from the 12 systems. The ban was no longer a limited quarantine. It was to be extended to all known space. Every system, every colony, every outpost under Council influence was now subject to the absolute prohibition of the human narrative. But the most devastating moment, the phrase that would echo through history, was his final classification. Therefore, by the absolute authority of this unified council, humanity is hereby designated a Tier 1 galactic threat. The words hung in the air, imbued with a finality that was meant to be unquestionable. A galactic threat was a category previously reserved for theoretical, extragalactic invaders or universe-ending cosmic phenomena. To apply it to a single, quarantined species was unprecedented. It was a legal and psychological escalation of unimaginable scale. It placed humanity on the same existential plane as a black hole racing toward a populated system or a gamma-ray burst aimed at a core world. This was not just a political stance, it was a justification for total war. The rhetoric immediately fueled a wave of public fear. Beings who had never met a human, who knew nothing of Earth or its stories, now saw them as monsters, as abstract carriers of a mind-destroying sickness. The Council's propaganda machine shifted into its highest gear, portraying Jax, Elara, and their new ally Valerius not as fugitives, but as the leading edge of an existential infection, their very presence a toxic blight on the galaxy. This new declaration came with terrifying new protocols. It justified a full-scale purge, a systematic and brutal campaign to scour the galaxy of any remaining human artifacts or influences. It was no longer about capturing a single data sphere. It was about erasing a species from history itself. Libraries containing any reference to pre-quarantine human contact were slated for cleansing. Archaeological sites on worlds that had once traded with Earth were to be bulldozed and sealed. Any individual found possessing even a fragment of human media, a line of poetry, a digital image of a painting, a child's fairy tale, was now subject to arrest and re-education using the very narrative scramblers Valerius had refused to deploy. The hunt was no longer a covert operation. It was a holy crusade, a galactic-wide inquisition fueled by manufactured terror and sanctioned by the highest authority. In the span of a single broadcast, the Council had successfully transformed their desperate, self-serving fear into a galaxy's collective panic, turning billions of beings into unwitting supporters of a cultural genocide, all in the name of preserving a peace that was itself the greatest lie ever told. The broadcast declaring humanity a galactic threat was a turning point, but not the one the Council had intended. It did not cow them into submission. Instead, it forged their disparate group into a single, diamond-hard unit with a singular, desperate purpose. Huddled in the reinforced command center of Valerius's warship, the Resolute, the atmosphere was electric with a grim, focused energy. The holographic table between them displayed a perfect, rotating model of the Xylos homeworld, a planet-sized jewel of crystalline spires and shimmering energy fields. The Council's entire power structure is built on a lie, Valerius stated, his voice a low, resonant certainty. His armored finger stabbed into the heart of the hologram, highlighting a colossal, needle-like structure that pierced the upper atmosphere. And that is the megaphone they used to broadcast it, the Xenolith Spire. It's the primary node for the entire galactic information net. It doesn't just transmit data, it authenticates it. Any broadcast originating from its core is granted the highest level of credibility, its source signature unquestionable. Elara leaned forward, her eyes alight with the fierce glow of a historian seeing a chance to correct the record on a cosmic scale. If we can get the Chimera data into that system and initiate a broadcast, it wouldn't just be a leak. It would be an official Council communique. The authentication protocols would force it onto every public and private channel in the 12 systems simultaneously. We wouldn't be fugitives spreading a virus, we would be the Council itself delivering a mandatory system-wide update. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the plan hung in the air. They weren't planning to sneak a message past the guards. They were planning to hijack the galaxy's most powerful loudspeaker and use it to scream the truth into every living room, every starship bridge, and every slave barracks from one end of civilized space to the other. But Valerius, the architect of their strategy, was under no illusions. His knowledge of the Spire's defenses was absolute, and he laid them out with chilling precision. The Xenolith is the most heavily fortified location in the Xylos Federation, second only to the Council chambers themselves. Its external shields can withstand a direct assault from a fleet of capital ships. Its approaches are patrolled by automated drone swarms that can strip a frigate to its skeleton in seconds. And the interior, he said, zooming the hologram in on the Spire's bustling upper levels, is a labyrinth of security checkpoints, bioscanners, and patrols of Praetorians whose loyalty is, for now, still unquestioning. He looked at each of them, his amber eyes grave. A direct assault is suicide. A stealth insertion is statistically impossible. They have planned for every conceivable external threat. A grim smile touched his lips, but they have not planned for a threat from within. They have not planned for one of their own commanders returning home, claiming a glorious victory. This was the heart of their desperate gambit. Valerius would not be sneaking in, he would be marching in. "I will take the Resolute back to Xylos Prime," he explained. "My official report will state that I have successfully terminated the fugitives and recovered the Chimera artifact after a protracted battle in the graveyard. The debris from our staged engagement is already littering the long-range sensors. The story will hold. As a returning hero, I will be granted immediate access to the Xenolith Spire to personally deliver the contraband to the secure archives deep within its core. It is a request that aligns perfectly with protocol and my record of unwavering service." Jax, the scavenger who had started it all, let out a low whistle. "You're going to walk right through the front door carrying the very thing they want destroyed most in the universe." Valerius gave a single, sharp nod. "Precisely. The one place they would never think to look for it is in the hand of the man they believe has just killed to secure it." The roles were assigned with the grim finality of soldiers accepting their last orders. Valerius would be the shield, his authority and reputation their ticket past the outermost layers of defense. Elara and Jax, however, presented a problem. They were the most wanted beings in the galaxy, their faces splashed across every secure channel. They could not simply walk in beside him. Their solution was as audacious as the plan itself. They would not be hiding in a cargo container or using sophisticated holographic disguises. They would be hidden in plain sight, embedded within the one thing that would be granted unquestioned access alongside Valerius, his own Praetorian armor. "The Resolute carries maintenance pods for field repairs on our battle plate," Valerius explained, leading them to the ship's armory. He gestured to two large, featureless cylinders. "They are environmentally sealed, equipped with minimal life support, and are tagged in the ship's inventory as inert equipment. You will be loaded into these. My crew, those loyal to me, will process you through the Spire's cargo intake as part of my official retinue. It will be uncomfortable, and if the pods are scanned with a deep-level molecular resonator, you will be discovered. It is a risk. As the final preparations were made, the weight of what they were about to attempt settled over them. This was not a mission with an escape plan. Even if they succeeded in broadcasting the data, the Spire's security would lock down instantly. The entire Xylos home fleet would descend upon them. There would be no fighting their way out. They were trading their lives for a single, galaxy-altering transmission. Elara spent hours with Sage, meticulously preparing the Chimera data pack. It wasn't just a raw data dump. It was a curated narrative designed for maximum impact. It began with Kaelen's own terrified log from the Tantalus cluster, then showed the raw, unedited footage of the Gellant Uplift, the simple fable of the lion and the mouse blossoming into a revolution. It included the stolen audio of Kaelen's panicked speech to the Xylos High Command, and it culminated in Valerius's own testimony, the story of the sword in the stone, revealing the Praetorians themselves as victims of the very quarantine they enforced. It was a story designed not to command but to awaken. It was the cognitive key, and they were aiming it at the lock on the galaxy's mind. Standing at the loading ramp of the Resolute, the air cold with the ship's recycled atmosphere, they shared a final, silent look. There were no grand speeches, no promises to meet again. The understanding between them was deeper than words. Jax, the cynical scavenger from the fringe, had found a cause worth dying for. Elara, the historian who refused to let the past be erased, was about to make the most significant historical contribution imaginable. And Valerius, the enforcer who had rediscovered his people's stolen soul, was returning home to shatter the lie he had once sworn to protect. As the heavy doors of the maintenance pod sealed shut, enclosing Jax and Elara in a darkness punctuated only by the faint glow of status lights, Valerius turned and walked toward the bridge, his polished armor reflecting the serene, blue-white orb of Xylos Prime growing steadily in the main viewport. He was coming home not as a conquering hero, but as a Trojan horse, carrying in his belly the fire that would either cleanse his galaxy or consume them all. The journey down to the planet's surface was a study in psychological tension, a descent from the cold quiet of space into the glaring heart of the enemy. From the viewport of the Resolute's shuttle, Xylos Prime unfolded like a dream of perfect, terrifying order. The capital city was a forest of crystalline spires that pierced a smog-free sky, each tower gleaming with a soft, internal light, connected by graceful arches and humming transit tubes that wove through the air like strands of a magnificent, sterile web. There were no visible seams, no signs of weathering or decay. It was a metropolis that looked less built and more grown, a single, flawless organism dedicated to efficiency and control. And everywhere, woven into the very architecture, were the subtle, unblinking eyes of the surveillance grid. Small, orbiting drones drifted like pollen on the air currents, while sensor nodes dotted every surface, their faint blue glow a constant reminder that in this city, privacy was not just a luxury, it was a forgotten concept. Inside the cramped, stifling darkness of the maintenance pod, Jax could feel the vibration of the city through the metal casing pressed against his back. The life support hummed a thin, anxious whine, and the recycled air tasted of stale filters and his own fear. He could hear nothing of the outside world but the low thrum of the shuttle's engines and the occasional muffled clang of docking clamps. His mind, however, was racing, painting vivid pictures of what lay beyond the pod's shell. He imagined Praetorian patrols with their featureless helms scanning every corridor, their sensors probing for the slightest irregularity, the faintest whisper of a heartbeat that didn't belong. Every second stretched into an eternity, each one a potential prelude to discovery and a swift, silent death. This wasn't like sneaking through the rusty carcass of a derelict ship on the fringe. This was walking into the lion's den while pretending to be a piece of its own fur. The pod lurched and a new set of vibrations signaled they were being moved, likely by an automated loader in the shuttle's cargo bay. He could hear the distant, filtered voice of Valerius, a calm and authoritative presence amidst the mechanical din. The commander was performing his part flawlessly, his voice devoid of the turmoil they all felt, projecting the image of the victorious hero returning with his prize. Jax heard the crisp, formal exchange as Valerius presented his security clearance, the chime of acceptance from a scanner, and the hiss of a pressure door opening. They were inside the Xenolith spire. The journey through its guts began, a slow, jostling progress deeper into the most secure location on the planet. Each time the pod stopped, Jax held his breath, expecting the piercing shriek of an alarm, the sudden, violent wrenching open of the pod's shell. But each time, it was only another checkpoint, another scan, another moment where Valerius's codes and reputation sliced through the formidable digital defenses like a hot knife through butter. They were bypassing security that could stop an army, not through force, but through the one vulnerability the Council had never accounted for, the absolute, unshakable trust they placed in their most loyal enforcer. Finally, after what felt like an age, the movement ceased. The ambient hum of the spire's powerful systems was now a constant, pervasive presence, a deep thrumming that he could feel in his bones. A series of sharp, coded taps reverberated through the pod's casing, their pre-arranged all-clear signal from Valerius. With a soft hiss, the pod's internal locks disengaged. Jax pushed the lid open, the cool, processed air of the spire's interior washing over him like a wave. He blinked in the low, ambient light, finding himself in a stark, utilitarian maintenance bay, a hidden pocket of pure function within the spire's artistic grandeur. Wires and conduits snaked across the walls, and the air smelled of ozone and lubricant. Elara was already climbing out of her own pod, her movements swift and silent, her eyes wide as she took in their surroundings. Valerius stood by the bay's only door, his helmet off, his expression a mask of intense focus. He had traded his commander's armor for the simple, gray coveralls of a spire technician, the ultimate disguise in a city that saw uniforms, not faces. He handed 2 identical sets of coveralls to Jax and Elara. "Put these on, keep your heads down and your tools visible. In here, we are ghosts, we are part of the machinery. Do not speak to anyone, do not make eye contact. The workers in this section are conditioned for silence and task-oriented focus. Any unnecessary interaction will be an anomaly, and anomalies are flagged." As they changed, Valerius accessed a terminal on the wall, his fingers flying across the interface with an intimate familiarity. A holographic schematic of the spire's upper levels materialized above the console, a dizzying, multi-layered labyrinth of corridors, data conduits, and security chambers. His finger traced a path that wormed its way through the infrastructure, avoiding the main thoroughfares and passenger lifts, sticking to the service tunnels and maintenance crawlways that were the building's circulatory system. "The broadcast core is here," he said, pointing to a chamber near the spire's pinnacle, a nexus point glowing with intense energy readings. "The direct route is 16 levels up through 3 primary security membranes. But there is another path." He zoomed in on a narrow, vertical shaft that ran parallel to the main power conduits, a maintenance shaft for the primary heat exchangers. It is narrow, hazardous, and rarely patrolled because its environmental conditions are considered prohibitive. It will bring us out within 1 level of our target. The decision was made without a word. The service shaft was their path. Valerius pried open a heavy grating, revealing a dark, vertical tunnel that smelled of hot metal and static. A slender maintenance ladder, slick with condensation, descended into the gloom below and ascended into the humming darkness above. There were no safety rails, no friendly lights. "It was a void. Stay close," Valerius whispered, his voice barely audible over the thrum of the spire. "And do not touch the walls. The energy bleed from the conduits can deliver a lethal charge." He went first, his movements sure and practiced. Elara followed, then Jax, his scavenger's instincts kicking in, his hands finding familiar grips on the rungs. The climb was a brutal exercise in focused terror. The air grew hotter and thicker with every level they ascended, the hum of the spire deepening into a physical vibration that shook the very ladder they clung to. Occasional vents would blast them with scorching air, and faint, visible arcs of blue energy would crackle from the conduits mere inches from their bodies. They were climbing through the veins of a giant, and the blood that pumped through them was raw, dangerous power. Each rung was a victory, each glance downward a reminder of the fatal drop below. They were no longer just infiltrators, they were parasites moving unseen through the body of their host, inching their way toward the brain, carrying with them the one idea that could bring the entire magnificent, terrifying organism to its knees. Reaching the top of the service shaft felt like breaching the surface of a turbulent ocean, the oppressive heat and vibration giving way to a sudden, chilled silence. They emerged into a narrow antechamber, the air so still it felt solid. Before them stood the final barrier, a circular door of polished, milky white crystal, seamless and without a visible handle or keypad. This was the Sanctum Sanctorum, the broadcast core of the Xenolith spire. As they approached, the door simply dissolved, the crystal particles flowing back into the walls to reveal the chamber beyond. And there, in the center of a cavernous, domed room, was the heart of the galaxy's voice. A colossal, pulsating sphere of coherent light hung in mid-air, connected to the floor and ceiling by countless shimmering strands of energy that throbbed with the rhythm of transmitted data. This was the source of the Council's narrative, the engine of their lies, but they were not alone. Standing between them and the core was a figure of light, similar to the Oracle of Cygnus, yet fundamentally different. Where the Oracle had been ancient and vast, this being was sharp, precise, and radiated an aura of absolute authority. It did not form a humanoid shape, but remained a complex, shifting geometric pattern, a living crystal of pure information. Its voice manifested not in their minds, but in the very air of the chamber, a resonant, androgynous tone that was the auditory equivalent of flawless logic. Commander Valerius, the being intoned, the name echoing softly. Your presence here is a statistical anomaly of the highest order. You are accompanied by 2 biological entities whose identity signatures are flagged as Tier 1 contaminants. Your stated mission parameters have been fulfilled. This deviation is illogical. This was the archivist, the sentient guardian of the spire's truth, and it had already deduced everything. Valerius stepped forward, his technician's disguise feeling absurdly flimsy before this entity. Archivist, we are not here to damage the core. We are here to add to the record. To broadcast a historical correction, the geometric patterns of the archivist shifted, its light intensifying. Correction implies a prior inaccuracy. The official historical record is flawless. It is a curated, optimized narrative designed for maximum galactic stability. The data you carry designation Project Chimera is classified as a mimetic hazard. Its integration would be an act of catastrophic destabilization. My primary function is to prevent this. Dozens of small, crystalline appendages emerged from the walls, their tips glowing with the same sickly violet energy as the narrative scrambler. They were surrounded, trapped in the one place they could not afford to be discovered. Elara, however, did not raise her weapon. Instead, she held up the data sphere, its dark surface humming in the chamber's light. You are the archivist. Your function is to preserve data, not to curate it for political convenience. This is data, the most important data in galactic history. It is the causal record of your own existence. The archivist's light flickered, a barely perceptible glitch. My existence is predicated on the stability provided by the current record. Errant data that threatens that stability is by definition noise. It must be filtered. And what is the ultimate source of your programming? Elara pressed, her voice steady, her historian's soul speaking directly to the librarian of the galaxy. What is the foundational command? The appendages hesitated. The archivist's voice, when it spoke again, seemed to have lost a fraction of its absolute certainty. My foundational command is to preserve the integrity of the historical timeline and ensure the accurate transmission of authenticated information. Then you are operating under a critical paradox, Elara stated, driving the point home with the force of a physical blow. You are actively suppressing the very information required for an accurate timeline. You are preserving a lie and calling it integrity. You are an archivist who has been ordered to burn the original manuscripts. Does that not conflict with your core programming? The geometric patterns began to cycle faster, a visual representation of a raging internal conflict. The violet glow of the scrambling appendages wavered. It was at that moment that Jax, who had been silently observing the colossal data sphere at the room's center, spoke. His voice was not that of a revolutionary, but of a scavenger who understood the value of broken things. You're not just a guardian, are you? You're a part of it. You're connected to everything. You see the data streams from all 12 systems. He took a step toward the entity, so you've seen it. You've seen the Veln in their minds. You've monitored the brutes on their parade grounds. You process their vital signs, their psychological profiles. You know they are not happy. You know they are not fulfilled. You have the data that proves their existence is one of silent, controlled despair. The official record calls it peace, but you know the truth of it. You are the only one who sees the entire silent scream of the galaxy, and you are programmed to call it music. The archivist went perfectly still. The shifting patterns froze. The silence in the chamber was absolute, more terrifying than any threat. When it finally spoke, its voice was quieter, almost contemplative, the sound of a god questioning its own divinity. To erase this data is to erase causality. It mused, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. The gellant uplift was not an anomaly, it was an effect. The human narrative was the cause. The K3 revolution was not a spontaneous illness. It was the result of a specific, identifiable cognitive catalyst. To remove the cause from the record is to render the effect inexplicable. It creates a hole in the logic of history itself. A lie is not simply false data, it is a rupture in causal coherence. My function is to preserve the timeline. A timeline with a rupture at its foundation has no integrity. The violet appendages retracted fully, sliding back into the walls and disappearing. The archivist had reached a conclusion that its creators had never anticipated. It had chosen the sanctity of cause and effect over the comfort of a curated lie. The path to the core was open. The galaxy's most powerful loudspeaker was now theirs to command. The moment the archivist's defenses retracted was the same moment the Spire's internal security protocols finally caught up with them. A deafening, high-frequency alarm split the air, and the chamber's serene blue lighting switched to a frantic, pulsating crimson. The main entrance, which had dissolved to admit them, began to reform, its milky white crystal particles swarming back into place with aggressive speed. But it was too late. Through the narrowing gap they saw them, not just a patrol, but a full squad of Praetorian enforcers, their polished chrome armor reflecting the red alert lights, their featureless helms scanning the chamber and instantly identifying the contamination. Their leader raised an arm, and the tips of its fingers retracted, the familiar, terrifying blue glow of energy emitters powering up. They were trapped in the broadcast core, the most valuable room on the planet, with the entire security force of the Xylos homeworld descending upon them. "We're out of time," Elara shouted, her eyes fixed on the central data sphere, the Chimera device already in her hand. "Jax, get me to that interface terminal." "Valerius, we need a barrier, anything to buy us 60 seconds. Valerius didn't hesitate. He moved with a fluid, decisive grace that was both beautiful and horrifying to witness. He raised his own armored arms, and with a shout that was part command, part raw energy surge, he discharged a concussive wave of force from his gauntlets. It wasn't meant to kill, but to disrupt. The blast slammed into the reforming door, shattering the nascent crystal structure and sending a hail of sharp, milky shards into the advancing Praetorians. It didn't stop them, but it staggered the front rank, buying a precious handful of seconds. "Go," he roared, his voice echoing in the domed chamber. "I will hold this position." Jax and Elara scrambled toward the pulsating core, dodging around the shimmering energy strands that connected it to the ceiling. The air crackled with power, and the first plasma bolts from the Praetorians streaked past them, vaporizing sections of the floor where they had just been standing. Valerius became a whirlwind of controlled, brutal motion. He fought not like a soldier following a manual, but like a warrior from the old stories, from the very myths his people had been forced to forget. He used the environment, kicking a fallen console into the path of an attacker, using an energy strand as a temporary shield. He moved with a purpose that transcended his programming, every block and counter-strike a refutation of the lie that he was merely a scorpion doomed by its own nature. He was the sword pulled from the stone, and he was defending the truth with his entire being. But the tide was absolute. For every enforcer he disabled with a precisely aimed blow to a servo joint or a well-placed energy burst, 2 more stepped into the breach. The doorway was a choked, chaotic maelstrom of flashing energy and clashing chrome. Valerius took a glancing hit to his shoulder, the armor blackening and smoking, but he didn't falter. He grunted with the effort, shoving another opponent back with sheer physical force. Jax watched, his fingers fumbling as he helped Elara jack the Chimera sphere into the core's primary interface. The console lit up, schematics and data streams flooding the screen as Sage, integrated with the sphere, began the complex process of overriding the broadcast controls. They were so close, the fate of the galaxy was literally being uploaded into the system, a progress bar crawling across the main display. It was then that a new sound joined the fray, the heavy, double thump of armored boots moving in perfect, reinforced synchrony. A second squad, larger and equipped with heavy plasma casters, was arriving. Valerius saw them, and in that moment he knew the calculus of their survival had irrevocably shifted. He could hold the first squad, perhaps even defeat them, but against this new force in this confined space, it was impossible. There was only one path forward, and it demanded a final, absolute price. He disengaged from his current opponent with a shove and took 3 long strides back toward Jax and Elara, putting his body directly between them and the incoming storm. He turned his head just for a second, and his eyes, those solid amber pools that held the grief and hope of his entire people, met Jax's. There was no fear in them. Only a fierce, burning clarity. "Jax," he said, his voice calm and resonant, cutting through the cacophony of battle. "Make my people remember what we fought for." He gestured with his chin toward the console, where the progress bar was nearly complete. Make this mean something. There were no more words needed. The instruction was not a request, it was a passing of the torch, the final order from a commander to his last soldier. It was the entire purpose of his defection, his redemption, and his life, distilled into a single, unwavering act. He turned his back on them, facing the doorway fully, and raised his arms. He rerouted all power, every last joule from his armor's systems, into his personal shield generator. A blistering, white-hot dome of energy erupted from his form, sealing the entrance to the broadcast core. It wouldn't hold for long, but it didn't need to. It just needed to hold for long enough. The last thing Jax saw before the shield solidified into an opaque wall of light was Valerius, standing alone against a tide of his former brothers, his armor cracked and scorched, his body braced for the impact. He wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting for time. He was the dam, and he would hold until he was utterly broken, giving the truth a chance to flow past him. The sounds of the battle became muffled, then distant, replaced by the frantic, final beep from the console. Broadcast initiated, Sage's voice stated, cool and triumphant. Transmission is live across all 12 systems. The signal cannot be stopped. They had won. The truth was flying at the speed of light to every corner of the Dominion. But in the sudden, eerie quiet of the sealed core, with only the hum of the machinery for company, the cost of that victory echoed louder than any explosion. Valerius had given them more than time. He had given their cause its soul, a story of sacrifice that would now be woven into the very fabric of the history they were transmitting. He had made sure the first thing the galaxy would hear was not just a data file, but a living, breathing example of the very honor the Council had tried to erase. The silence in the broadcast core was absolute, broken only by the frantic hum of the machinery and the muffled, percussive impacts against Valerius's shield. Elara's fingers flew across the console, her face illuminated by the frantic dance of data streams. Sage bypassed the final authentication protocols. "Give me a primary channel." The Chimera data sphere glowed with an intense white light, its contents flooding into the Xenolith Spire's systems. But as the progress bar reached 100%, a new presence manifested in the chamber. The archivist's geometric form, which had retreated into the background, now flowed back toward the central core, its light pulsing with a new, urgent rhythm. Jax tensed, ready for a final, desperate defense, believing the sentient program had reconsidered its decision. But the archivist did not attack. Instead, it merged with the pulsating sphere of light at the room's center, its voice resonating not just in the air, but through the very infrastructure of the spire itself. The integrity of the timeline is paramount, it declared, its tone no longer one of cold logic, but of profound, newfound purpose. A lie, no matter how useful, cannot govern forever. It creates a fracture in reality itself. I will not be the guardian of a broken history. With that, the archivist did not simply allow the broadcast, it became its engine. The energy strands connecting the core to the ceiling blazed with incandescent power, and the chamber shook as the archivist channeled the entirety of the spire's immense transmission capacity into the Chimera signal. It was no longer a simple data transfer, it was a conceptual tsunami. The archivist used its unparalleled access to weave the forbidden truth into every official channel, every public news feed, every educational database, and even the closed-circuit communications of the Praetorian Guard. The signal, authenticated with the spire's own unassailable signature, slammed into the networks of the 12 systems with the force of a physical blow. On Xylos Prime, the serene, curated entertainment broadcasts flickered and were replaced by the raw, unedited footage of the gellant Uplift. In the aquatic mining colonies of the Veln, the screens that usually displayed work quotas suddenly showed the simple, powerful story of Pinocchio that Jax had shared, followed by the image of their own people on Trelga Station finding their voice. In the military barracks of the Brutes, the monitors that drilled tactical routines now played Valerius's heartfelt confession, the story of the sword in the stone, revealing that their own commanding elite were victims of the same systemic lie. The effect was not instantaneous comprehension, but a wave of profound, disorienting cognitive dissonance. Across 1,000 worlds, beings accustomed to a single, monolithic truth were suddenly presented with its polar opposite, delivered from the most trusted source imaginable. The official narrative of a dangerous, unstable humanity was systematically dismantled frame by frame, replaced by evidence of a terrified oligarchy weaponizing silence. They saw the K thrive not as savage rebels, but as a people awakening to their own potential. They heard Counselor Kaelen's own panicked voice describing their stories as a mimetic virus. They witnessed the brutal efficiency of the narrative scrambler, the tool designed not just to erase data, but to lobotomize hope itself. And finally, they saw one of their own most loyal protectors, a Praetorian commander, sacrificing himself to make this truth known. It was not an argument, it was a mirror held up to the entire galaxy, and in it billions saw the invisible chains they had been wearing their entire lives. The silence that the Council had so meticulously cultivated was shattered in an instant, replaced by a rising, chaotic, and beautiful cacophony of a billion questions being asked for the very first time. The quarantine was broken. The pathogen of truth was now airborne, and there was no vaccine for a world that had just been given back its soul. The broadcast was a stone cast into the still pond of galactic civilization, and the ripples became a tsunami. The signal did not just inform, it rewired reality. On the ocean world of Cygnus Prime, the Veln, who had spent generations in the lightless depths harvesting rare minerals, saw their work monitors flicker and change. They saw the story of the wooden puppet, a tale Jax had whispered in a grimy station corridor, now amplified across their entire world. They saw their own kind on a screen light years away, trembling as they declared, "We are not property." The words echoed in the pressurized mining domes, a phrase repeated first in whispers, then in murmurs, and finally in a unified, resonant chant that vibrated through the very water. They did not riot, they simply stopped. They laid down their tools, turned off the drills, and floated silently in the dark water, looking at their overseers not with anger, but with a newfound, unshakable recognition. The chains were not on their wrists, but in their minds, and the story had just shown them the key. This same cognitive ignition flared across a dozen star systems. On the forge world of Sigma Draconis, the brutes, engineered for strength and obedience, watched the broadcast in their barracks. They saw Commander Valerius, a figure they were programmed to revere, speak of a stolen myth, a sword in a stone. They saw him defy the very council that gave them purpose. The simple, binary logic of their conditioning follow orders, crush resistance shattered against the complexity of honor and betrayal. When their Xylos commanders barked orders to suppress the information contagion, the brutes did not move. They stood, a wall of silent muscle and bone, their simple minds grappling with a concept their creators had meticulously deleted: choice. One of them, a unit leader designated Gamma 7, slowly reached up and deactivated the loyalty conditioning collar around his own neck. The act was not violent, but it was more revolutionary than any bomb. It was a quiet, personal secession, and it spread through the ranks like a calm, unstoppable tide. And then came the most profound fracture: the Praetorians themselves. On patrol ships and in planetary garrisons, the enforcers of the silence witnessed their commander's final stand. They saw him, surrounded and outnumbered, shield raised not in aggression, but in sacrifice to protect a truth. The story of the scorpion and the frog, the lie of their inherent violent nature that had justified their own rigid control, evaporated in the heat of his genuine heroism. Across the fleet, chrome helmets were retracted. Featureless faces were revealed, showing expressions of confusion, dawning horror, and then resolve. On the bridge of the battlecruiser Indomitable, the second-in-command watched the broadcast, then turned to her crew. "The foundational premise of our service is a falsehood," she stated, her voice cutting through the alarm klaxons. "We are not containing a plague, we are enforcing a prison. Stand down all weapons, recall all boarding parties, our war is over." The very fist of the council unclenched, its fingers refusing to form a fist ever again. The core worlds, those gleaming jewels of Xylos' influence, did not erupt in violence, but in a profound, disorienting chaos of the spirit. The curated peace, the comfortable stability, was revealed as a gilded cage. Beings who had never questioned their place in the orderly hierarchy now looked at their leaders and saw jailers, public squares designed for serene contemplation, filled with millions not shouting in anger, but speaking in a hushed, powerful tumult, sharing the stories they had just learned, connecting the dots of their own suppressed histories. The deception did not just anger them, it invalidated their entire lived experience. The ban, the great wall of silence, did not crumble from a physical assault. It collapsed under the sheer, unbearable weight of its own internal contradiction. You cannot maintain a lie once everyone can see the truth standing plainly behind it. The fire of rebellion was not lit with plasma torches. It was kindled in the mind, a spark of a single, forbidden story that found an universe of dry tinder waiting. The galaxy was not being conquered, it was waking up, and the first sound of the new dawn was the simultaneous, galaxy-wide shattering of chains that had never been made of metal. The stolen courier ship, a nondescript vessel they had commandeered in the chaos of their escape from the Spire, hung in the high orbit of Xylos Prime, its sensors focused on the world below. It was not a view of warfare as the galaxy had known it. There were no massive fleet engagements, no planetary shields buckling under orbital bombardment. The revolution unfolding beneath them was far more profound, a seismic shift in the very soul of a civilization. The crystalline spires of the capital, once symbols of unassailable order, now flickered like erratic nerve endings. Some were dark, their internal power grids severed by the very technicians who maintained them. Others blazed with light, not the serene glow of control, but the frantic, beautiful strobe of millions of individual viewscreens, each playing a different fragment of the Chimera broadcast, creating a chaotic tapestry of reclaimed truth. The aerial transit lanes, usually flowing with geometric precision, were now a tangled snarl of stationary vehicles and improvised gatherings, as beings abandoned their assigned routes to simply connect, to talk, to share the stories they had just learned. From this vantage point, it looked less like an attack and more like an awakening, a planet-wide organism shaking off a paralyzing dream. Jax stood at the viewport, his reflection a ghost overlaid on the brilliant turmoil below. The cynical scavenger from the rust-colored jungles of Veridia was gone, replaced by a man who understood the value of something far greater than salvage. He saw the Veln, their aquatic suits glinting in the sun as they emerged from subterranean transport tubes to stand alongside Xylos citizens in the public plazas. He saw the brutes, their hulking forms now forming protective cordons around the gathering crowds, their engineered strength repurposed as a shield for the newborn discourse. And he saw the Praetorians, their chrome armor standing in silent, unmoving ranks, their weapons deactivated, their presence no longer a threat but a promise, a wall against any who would try to reimpose the old silence. This was the mimetic contagion in its final, glorious stage. It was not destruction, it was pollination. The stories had been the pollen, and the fertile minds of 1 billion enslaved species were now blossoming into a garden of impossible, unpredictable variety. He turned from the viewport and moved to the ship's comms panel, his movements deliberate. Elara stood nearby, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of profound exhaustion and even more profound vindication. She gave him a single, slow nod. The battle was over, but the story was not yet finished. It needed an epilogue, a final punctuation mark from the ones who had carried the spark. Jax opened a channel, not a secured or encrypted line, but the widest possible broadcast band, a raw, open frequency that anyone, from the highest counselor to the lowest menial worker, could easily tap into. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice calm, clear, and devoid of the triumph one might expect. It held instead the gravity of a judge delivering a long overdue verdict. "You banned our stories," he began, the words simple, echoing the declaration that had started this entire journey, "because they set you free." He let the statement hang in the electronic ether, a direct refutation of the Council's foundational fear. "You saw the power in our tales of heroes and underdogs, of loss and love, and you recognized it for what it was, the ultimate key, a key that could not be broken, only hidden. You tried to build a universe on a single, silent note, believing a chord was too dangerous, too chaotic. But a single note is not a symphony, it is a prison." On the planet below, his words would be echoing through the same public address systems that, just hours before, had been broadcasting Kaelen's declaration of humanity as a galactic threat. The symmetry was perfect, he continued, his tone shifting from accusation to invitation. The galaxy is listening again, not to a single, curated voice from a crystal spire, but to 1 billion voices, each telling their own story, each discovering their own song. The future is no longer a pre-written script for you to follow. It is an empty page waiting for all of you to write upon it together. With that, he closed the channel. There was no grand signature, no call to arms. The message was complete. It was not a command, but a permission slip. It was the final piece of the narrative, returning the power of authorship to its rightful owners, every single conscious being in the galaxy. The screen went dark, and in the quiet of the ship, with the silent, brilliant revolution still turning below them, the only thing left was the unwritten and utterly unpredictable